Hey there, my wedding planning friends, and welcome back to my channel. If this is your first time here, thank you so much for clicking on my video. I'm Emily Summer. I'm a wedding planner based in Montana, and I make weekly videos on wedding planning tips and advice. So today's video, we're talking about some of the not so fun parts of wedding planning. However, they are essential when it comes to planning your wedding. So when you first get engaged and you're dreaming about your wedding, there's obviously a lot of really fun aspects that go into planning your wedding, like dreaming of your perfect venue, thinking about the colors and the flowers and all the decor you want to have. But there are some not so fun parts of wedding planning as well. And these are the ones that it's nice to kind of just get out of the way early and things to think about right off the bat so that you know you are checking these off the list and making sure that you're not procrastinating or avoiding the more not so fun or not so glamorous parts of wedding planning. Number one, you probably could have guessed it, is your budget. Of course, this is a very key component when it comes to planning your wedding as a whole. So this is something that should be done in the very, very beginning stages of wedding planning. You want to sit down and talk to your partner about not only your overall wedding budget, so your kind of all-in dollar amount, that's your max budget, but you also want to make sure that you're categorizing this budget to make the rest of the wedding planning process a little bit easier so that you know where that overall budget, what you are allowing yourself to allot to each category of your budget and what are your priorities. So the money conversation is, again, not a super fun one, but it is number one and probably the most important part before you get into any further planning of your wedding. Another important conversation to have among this is to have the conversation of where that money is coming from. Are you two paying for the whole thing yourselves? Do you have parental assistance coming? Who's gonna pay for what? Are you breaking it down by category on maybe your parents are going to pay for the food and your partner's parents are going to pay for the decor, the flowers, whatever that is. Make sure you're having the conversation of not only what your budget is, but where that money's coming from and who is going to be paying and contributing to what. Number two is your guest list. The reason why this is sometimes not so fun is it can be a very tedious task to sit down and compile all the people that you are planning to invite to your wedding. Or maybe this is a matter of scaling down this list, which could be even more tedious and more difficult. And then on top of your guest list alone, so not only the names of the guests that you plan to invite, you need to track down every single one of their addresses. And this is obviously a very important part of the wedding planning process because you will need to be inviting them to your wedding, which means you will need their addresses, contact info, however you are doing that. So again, this is going to happen pretty early in the planning stage. You want to make sure that you have your guest list, or at least a pretty good idea of your guest list before you are making any other decisions, including booking your venue. My dog just knocked over my camera, so if I look like I'm in a different position, that's why. Number three is your marriage license. This is obviously a very key component to your wedding. Otherwise, none of this is going to be legal. If that's something that doesn't matter to you, then that's fine. But if you're planning to legally wed, you need to make sure that you are going through the proper process to acquire your marriage license, which will then turn into your marriage certificate. I did a whole video on marriage licenses and how to obtain those, acquire them, what to do after your wedding. So definitely check that out. I will link it above if you have any questions on marriage licenses whatsoever. I answer them all in that video. Number four is contracts in general. So yes, it can be fun to book a lot of the vendors for your wedding, but you want to make sure that any person that you are hiring for your wedding, anything that you are exchanging money for services or products, make sure that there is a contract in place with these people. You want to make sure that you fully understand the scope of what you are hiring them to do and make sure that if anything were to happen and they don't fulfill their duties or what you hired them for, you are protected in that sense. So make sure that you are making everybody that you hire, make sure that it is a legit agreement and that both parties have signed, you and the vendor. Also, want to make sure that you are reading these contracts. So don't just blindly sign them. Make sure that you are thoroughly reading the contracts, that you understand not only what is expected of them, but also what is expected of you as the client. And number five is seating charts. I can't stress enough how important it is to have some type of seating chart. You don't have to go in and assign every single individual seat at your wedding. Of course, this makes things even more efficient, but that's not a requirement. I just ask that you have some sort of seating arrangement and seating plan for your wedding. This just works wonders when it comes to efficiency. I can't tell you how many times I have attended a wedding that didn't have a seating chart and it just becomes somewhat chaos when it comes time to sit down. And a lot of times couples don't realize what that's going to be like. They think it's easier to not have a seating chart because then people can just go sit wherever they want and sit with whoever they want. The problem that arises with this is if you have a group of, say, 5 friends that want to sit together, then they have to find a table that has 5 empty seats. And if you are having tables of 8 and you have one couple sitting at a table that's 2 people, and then there's another couple, then there's only going to be 4 seats left, and this group of 5 it's just an odd number to try and find the amount of single seats for this group of people to meet. And what ends up happening is people will just pull chairs from another table to squeeze in, and then you have to grab extra glassware and plates and flatware, and it just becomes a little bit of a mess. So you don't have to have individual assigned seats if you don't want to go through that whole process, but at least having assigned tables so you have the number of guests at each table allotted, so you know exactly what you are going to have at each table. There isn't that chaos or musical chairs that happens when you don't have this seating chart. Sometimes a conversation that arises when you are working on a seating chart or just talking about kind of guests in general is having the conversation of family dynamics. Maybe you have marriages, divorces that are not necessarily cordial, and that's very common, and that's something to discuss with your partner so that you guys can have a plan in place for anything that you feel like might be a hiccup on the day. Make sure you're communicating that with a wedding planner or your photographer just to avoid any sort of family drama. Everybody has it. It's a very common thing. In my experience, most of the time on the wedding day, people can kind of put their drama aside and be there for the couple and for the wedding. But it's always a good idea to kind of have these conversations just to make sure that you are aware of what could arise at your wedding. And this might play a role in your seating chart, and this might require you to have a seating chart. I've had couples that have made a seating chart specifically so that they could keep 2 people away from each other at the same table. So whatever that reason is for you, highly recommend seating charts, as tedious and annoying as it might be. Planning your wedding should be and will be a fun, enjoyable experience for you. However, there are some not so fun parts of the wedding planning process that are still equally as important as things like your wedding dress and your flowers. So make sure that you are still accomplishing these 5 not so fun parts of your wedding planning. Hopefully you found this video helpful. If you did, please like and subscribe to get weekly videos on wedding planning tips and advice, and we'll see you next week.